Navy destroyer engine failed. They watched in shock as the old sailor fixed it alone. "That old man doesn't belong in our engine room," shouted the young Navy engineer, blocking the weathered sailor's path down the narrow corridor. The USS Titan, a billion-dollar guided missile destroyer, sat dead in the water with its engines completely silent. Modern diagnostics showed nothing wrong, but the massive vessel refused to move. Then a 74-year-old man in civilian clothes appeared with a toolbox older than most of the crew, and what he did in the next 20 minutes left everyone speechless. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in all directions as the USS Titan drifted helplessly 200 miles west of San Diego. What should have been a routine training exercise had turned into a nightmare scenario for Captain Sarah Mitchell and her crew of 280 sailors. The destroyer's main propulsion system had shut down without warning, leaving the billion-dollar warship floating like a cork, while frantic engineers scrambled to diagnose the problem. In the ship's state-of-the-art engine room, Lieutenant Commander Jake Reeves led a team of the Navy's best propulsion specialists. At 32, Reeves was considered a rising star in naval engineering, with multiple advanced degrees and certifications in the latest marine propulsion technology. His team of young engineers surrounded banks of computer monitors, running diagnostic after diagnostic on the ship's sophisticated gas turbine engines. "Status report," Reeves demanded for the fourth time in an hour, sweat beading on his forehead despite the engine room's climate control. Petty Officer Collins, barely 24 and fresh out of technical school, looked up from his computer terminal with obvious frustration. "Sir, all systems show green across the board. According to the diagnostics, the engines should be running perfectly, but we're getting zero response from the turbines." The problem was more serious than just a mechanical failure. The USS Titan was part of a critical naval exercise designed to test America's Pacific defense capabilities. Foreign naval observers were watching, allies were depending on American technological superiority, and the Pentagon had made it clear that failure was not an option. Every minute the destroyer sat motionless was a minute of international embarrassment. That's when an unexpected figure appeared at the engine room's security checkpoint. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, standing guard at the entrance, looked skeptical as he examined the civilian identification card handed to him by a man who looked like he belonged in a retirement home rather than aboard a modern warship. Frank Castellano, the ID read, Civilian Marine Engineering Consultant. Castellano was 74 years old, with snow-white hair, deeply lined hands, and a slight stoop to his shoulders that spoke of decades of hard physical labor. He wore simple work clothes, faded blue jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and steel-toed boots that had clearly seen better days. Most remarkably, he carried a battered metal toolbox that looked like it had been manufactured sometime around World War II. "Sir, I need to see some authorization before I can let you into the engine room," Martinez said politely but firmly. Castellano pulled out a folded letter bearing the seal of the Secretary of the Navy. "Captain Mitchell called for me personally," he explained in a gravelly voice that carried the hint of a Brooklyn accent. "Your engines are down, and apparently your computer experts can't figure out why." Word of the civilian's arrival spread quickly through the engine room, and Lieutenant Commander Reeves emerged from behind his bank of monitors with obvious irritation. "Who authorized a civilian to enter a restricted area during an active crisis?" he demanded, looking Castellano up and down with undisguised disdain. "And what's with the antique toolbox? This is a modern warship, not a garage in Queens." The young engineers gathered around, some snickering at the sight of the elderly man with his ancient tools. Petty Officer Collins whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Does he think he's going to fix a gas turbine engine with a wrench from the 1950s? The laughter that followed was cruel and dismissive, the kind that comes from young people who mistake inexperience for intelligence. Castellano ignored the mockery and set his toolbox down with a heavy thunk. "Son," he said to Reeves, "I've been working on ship engines since before you were born. Sometimes the old ways work better than all your fancy computers." Reeves crossed his arms, his engineering pride clearly wounded by the implication that his high-tech approach was inadequate. "Mr. Castellano, with all due respect, these are LM 2500 gas turbines generating 25,000 shaft horsepower each. They're controlled by integrated computer systems that didn't exist when you were learning your trade. Is that right?" Castellano asked mildly, approaching the massive engine housing. He placed his weathered hand on the turbine casing and stood perfectly still for a moment, as if listening to something no one else could hear. "And these computer systems of yours, they're telling you everything's fine?" "That's correct," Reeves replied stiffly. "All diagnostics show normal parameters. No fault codes, no error messages, no indication of mechanical problems." Castellano nodded slowly, then opened his ancient toolbox. Inside, nestled in oil-stained foam, were tools that belonged in a maritime museum. A hand-forged wrench with USS Missouri 1943 etched into its handle. A pressure gauge with a face yellowed by age. A stethoscope that had been used to diagnose engine problems before computers existed. "Mind if I take a listen?" he asked. The engineers exchanged glances that mixed amusement with incredulity. Listening to an engine? In an age of computer diagnostics and sensor arrays, the idea seemed ludicrously primitive. But before Reeves could object, Castellano had placed the stethoscope against various points on the engine housing, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times. After several minutes of careful listening, Castellano straightened up with a knowing look in his eyes. "Your problem isn't with the engines," he announced. "It's with the fuel delivery system. Specifically, the high-pressure fuel pump on engine number 2. Reeves pulled up the relevant diagnostics on his computer screen. "Impossible. The fuel system is showing normal pressure and flow rates. Computer says the pump is operating within specifications." "Computers can lie," Castellano said simply. "They can only tell you what their sensors report. But if the sensors are wrong, the computer will be wrong too." He reached into his toolbox and pulled out the hand-forged wrench, its metal darkened by decades of use. This wrench helped fix the propulsion system on the Missouri during World War II. It's about to fix your modern destroyer too. What happened next violated every protocol in the Navy's technical manual. Without waiting for permission, Castellano began accessing parts of the fuel system that weren't even mentioned in the standard troubleshooting procedures. He worked with the confidence of someone who understood not just how the machinery was supposed to work, but how it actually worked in the real-world world, with all its quirks and hidden vulnerabilities. The young engineers watched in fascination and growing respect as Castellano's weathered hands moved over the machinery with surgical precision. He wasn't guessing or experimenting. Every movement was purposeful, based on decades of hard-won knowledge that no computer simulation could replicate. If you're enjoying this incredible story of how old-school expertise triumphed over modern technology, make sure to subscribe for more amazing veteran stories like this one. Within minutes, Castellano had located a fuel pressure regulator that the ship's diagnostic systems couldn't even access. "Here's your problem," he announced, holding up a small component that looked perfect to the naked eye. This regulator is working within spec according to your computers, but it's got a hairline crack that's causing microsecond pressure drops. Your sensors can't detect it because the drops are too brief, but they're enough to disrupt the turbine ignition sequence. Lieutenant Commander Reeves examined the part under a magnifying glass and found the tiny crack exactly where Castellano had said it would be. "How did you know?" he asked, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. The diagnostics showed no problems with that component. Castellano smiled and tapped his temple. 47 years of listening to engines, son. They talk to you if you know how to listen. The repair took less than 10 minutes once the problem was identified. Castellano replaced the faulty regulator with a spare from the ship's inventory, using tools that predated most of the crew by decades. When he finished, he stepped back and wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag that had probably been with him since the Vietnam War. "Try her now," he said quietly. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, humbled by what he had witnessed, gave the order to restart the engines. The turbines spun up with a deep, powerful roar that resonated through the entire ship. The USS Titan was alive again, her propulsion system operating flawlessly despite hours of failed attempts by the most advanced diagnostic equipment in the world. The engine room fell silent except for the satisfying hum of perfectly tuned machinery. The young engineers who had mocked Castellano's ancient tools now looked at him with something approaching awe. Petty Officer Collins approached hesitantly. "Mr. Castellano, how did you learn to do that? I mean, to diagnose problems that computers can't detect." Castellano began packing his tools, each one returning to its designated spot in the battered toolbox. "Started as a machinist's mate on a destroyer escort in 1967, he explained. "Spent 3 tours off Vietnam keeping engines running with spare parts that didn't exist, and tools I made myself. After the Navy, I worked civilian shipyards for 40 years, fixed everything from fishing boats to aircraft carriers." "But why didn't you use modern diagnostic equipment?" asked another engineer. "Why rely on such old-fashioned methods?" Castellano closed his toolbox with the same care he might show a valuable heirloom. "Son, computers are wonderful tools. They can process information faster than any human ever could. But they can only work with the information they're given. Experience teaches you to look for problems in places the computers don't know to check." Captain Mitchell appeared in the engine room, having received word that propulsion had been restored. She found Castellano preparing to leave, his job complete and his bill already paid in the satisfaction of a problem solved. "Mr. Castellano," she said, "on behalf of the crew of the USS Titan, thank you. You saved not just our mission, but our reputation." Castellano shrugged modestly. "Just doing what I've always done, Captain. Fixing engines and getting sailors home safely." As he prepared to transfer back to the supply ship that had brought him to the Titan, the entire engine room crew gathered to see him off. What had started as mockery and dismissal had transformed into genuine respect and admiration for a man who represented the best traditions of American naval engineering. Lieutenant Commander Reeves approached for a final word. "Mr. Castellano, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to dismiss your methods and your experience. Is there anything you could teach us that might prevent this kind of problem in the future?" Castellano considered the question seriously. "Computers are tools, not solutions. Learn to use your senses as well as your sensors. And remember, the day you stop learning from the old-timers is the day you stop being an engineer." The story of Frank Castellano and the USS Titan spread quickly through the Navy's engineering community. Within weeks, A new training protocol had been established, requiring all propulsion specialists to spend time learning traditional diagnostic methods alongside their computer-based training. The program was unofficially known as the Castellano method, a combination of cutting-edge technology and time-tested experience. Castellano returned to his quiet retirement in San Diego, but his phone rang regularly with calls from Navy engineers facing problems their computers couldn't solve. He never refused a request for help, understanding that his knowledge represented a bridge between the Navy's glorious past and its technological future. The young engineers who had once mocked his ancient tools now sought him out as a mentor and teacher. The USS Titan completed its mission flawlessly, but the real victory had been the lesson learned by its crew. In an age of artificial intelligence and automated systems, there remained irreplaceable value in human experience, intuition, and the kind of practical wisdom that can only be earned through decades of hands-on work. Frank Castellano had demonstrated that the newest technology works best when combined with the oldest wisdom. Today, a small plaque hangs in the USS Titan's engine room, placed there by Lieutenant Commander Reeves as a reminder of the day an old sailor taught a new Navy the value of listening to the voices of experience. It reads simply, "In honor of Frank Castellano, who taught us that the best diagnostic tool is a trained ear and an experienced mind." The ancient toolbox might be retired, but the lessons it represented would serve the Navy for generations.